all I had was a backpack, a questionable moustache, and a story.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Aha Moments podcast with me, Kobi Omenaka. Today's guest is Mark Leruste.
That was like the aha moment. The aha moment was we all have a story worth sharing, and most of us are terrified of sharing it.
Mark is a storyteller, brand coach, and podcaster. I met Mark, first of all, on the podcast scene back in like 2015, back before the British Podcast Awards had even started.
And he stopped me and he was like, "Can I be honest?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "That is boring. This is not you."
And since then, we've kept in touch and intertwined in each other's journeys. Mark is an amazing guy, and I was interested to see what he's up to. And that's why I wanted to bring him onto this podcast to help me understand more about storytelling and help you understand more about storytelling too. Mark, it's a pleasure to see you again. How are you doing? Thank you very much for joining me on Aha Moments podcast. Thank
you for having me.
So it's been a while since I've seen your face, apart from on LinkedIn. Obviously, there's pandemics have happened and things like that. So, I mean, where have you been over the past 5 years?
I know. Do you know what it was interesting? Before jumping on your podcast or your conversation today, I was thinking, I don't even know how we met. Like, I want to, like, honestly, like, I was thinking, like, it's been such a like long time, and we've interweaved into each other's life over periods of time. I was like, I don't even know how I met Kobi. Like, I know at one point you did some escape stuff, but I don't think that's what it was. Was it a co-working space? Was it like through the podcast that you did with FlixWatcher? Like, for the love of God, I can't remember how we met, like how our cross paths.
It took me a minute, but I just remembered. So what happened was, because we're both podcasters, and we were both in a podcast panel.
Yes, with Emma Gannon.
Yes.
At General Assembly.
Yeah, General Assembly.
The podcast. It was called the Podcast Revolution.
Yeah, and with Imriel Morgan as well, who now runs Content is Queen, for example. Yeah. And Matt Hill was chairing the panel,
hosting,
and in the years before. Sorry, coming up to the first ever British Podcast Awards.
Yes.
So we're on that panel together, and we just kept in touch, and we're like,
yes. Oh my days, that is a long time ago.
It is.
Wow. Yes, that is exactly how we met. Thank you. I just, for the love of God, could not remember. I was like, I'm sure there was something before the podcast on FlixWatcher. That is how we met. Thank you for reminding me. And this is like, anyone listening or watching is just going like, what are these? This is age. This is what happens when you're in your 40s. Your memory just like, it's like this unbelievable blank. There's just nothing, you know?
And I think what happened was then you came on to FlixWatcher. And that was recorded with Samantha and that was recorded in the co-working space where that I was at that time. Yes. And you kind of walked in the same way I did, and you were like, "This place is actually like, I like the vibe here. Yeah. I want to start working here." So like a few months later, I think you started working there. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for the walk down memory lane. That everybody's like, "Okay, guys, get to the point of the conversation. This is like, do this on your own time." Anyway, good to be here, man. It's good to finally connect. I feel like these days, maybe it's between men in particular. I don't know. Like the way that we catch up and connect is by recording podcasts. It's kind of like
it's the easiest
in
way.
The diary. Yeah.
We don't do emotions doesn't come naturally as long as if it's not recorded.
That's true. That's why we send each other voice notes sometimes on WhatsApp. We're like, "Hey, I saw this thing on LinkedIn. That was amazing. What did you do? How are you finding the engagement algorithm? Like tanking?" Yeah. It's anyway. Good to be here, man.
In case anyone's wondering, the engagement is tanking for everyone, even the biggest pod people, even the biggest LinkedIn people. Everyone says it's tanking. So at least it's all uniformly tanking. So that's the main takeaway we can take.
We're all going down. All going down together. Yeah.
The captains are sinking with us as well. Yeah, so you moved to France. So we're both. That's it. We our lives intertwined with each other. If that doesn't sound too weird, but we're both in the similar part of London as well.
Yeah, that's
co-working
true.
space,
North London. Yeah.
Doing similar kind of things. Just being in the same area, and then kids happen. Life changes, that way, and then pandemic happens, and then life is like, okay, we need to really consider. So I've moved to the north of England. You've moved to France. Yeah. So what precipitated the move to France? Just more space?
Yeah. So look, I'll be perfectly honest. I think it mostly was my wife was just like, because she's half French, half German. So she grew up in Paris, and her family are around Paris, and her mum was in Germany, but everybody's coming back to Paris. And so the combination of the pandemic and Brexit, actually, a lot of French mums in the area that I was in London, because after living in North London during the pandemic, we had a newborn and a toddler in our flat, and that was pretty brutal. Yeah, that was pretty intense. So there was a short window at some point. I think it was in the June 2020. I forgot when it was. At some point, there was a short window. They were like allowing like removal companies to work or something weird. And we basically went to Clapham. We found a place in Clapham with a bit more space. And so the reason I mention this is that there's a big French community there, because there's a couple of international schools, like French bilingual schools in Clapham. And so you attract a lot of the French community. And I think there was this sort of, I don't know, feeling, I guess, in a way, of a lot of the French mums saying like they wanted to go home, they wanted to go back, they didn't feel as welcome as they did before. And also the isolation, like, we only saw a family a couple of times, if that, over a long period of time because of the restrictions, because of lockdowns. And so I think my partner at the time was just sort of like, I don't want to have to, wait for a border to open to be able to see my family. And so she wanted to come back to France. I was very resistant. And so the conversation went over for a year. And then eventually we're like, okay, let's give it a go. Let's see how it goes. And so we moved here. Yeah, we moved here, and we're back in my hometown, my area of my hometown, which is all sorts of weird because my daughter has the same teachers that I had.
Oh, wow.
When I was a kid. So yeah, that's like a full
again,
circle.
that's this intertwining and side of things. So we, first of all, do you speak fluent French?
Yes, I speak fluent French, but I can barely write French. So, but I can speak it.
And it's great that you're back where your teachers work. So my kids, so in the similar kind of vein, newborn at the start of pandemic, and small flat, not tenable, couldn't see family, and then moved back to my wife's from near Liverpool, I'm from near Manchester, so we moved back to the northwest to be closer to friends and family and things like that.
Sure.
And my kid is now back in the school where I was. I joined in the senior school, and he's there now in reception. So a lot of the buildings are the same, and the first time I walked through those doors for the first time in like 20 years,
it's like ghosts.
There's like madness.
Yeah.
And a couple of times, so some of my old teachers are still there and hadn't spoken to me in like 25 years. And you're like, oh, Mr. Grant. And he's like, and then this guy took a pause and he's like, Omenaka. I was like, oh yeah, you still remember me? There's been like tens of thousands of kids gone through the school since this time.
That's impressive.
It is.
That's impressive.
It is. And so I feel really like made up in a way that he's gone to the school that I went to, and should he want to, can stay through till he's 18. He's only 5 now, but
he's got some time to decide.
Yeah,
it is wild. I'll be honest. Like it took me a little while to settle back into this. In fact, I would say a good year and a half.
Right.
For me to kind of find my feet here, because it's a very different rhythm. It's a different lifestyle. There isn't a sort of entrepreneurial founder, speaker, creative, podcaster / whatever you want to put in there. Culture around here, and they'd even have internet up until recently in coffee shops. Like they'd even have coffee shops. So it was, and it's a very different pace. So when you come from London, and again, that's one of the reasons why we escaped London, right? It's because it is pretty intense. You're always on the go, but there's also an energy about London that I really love. I still have to go to London every once in a while. I go back to London for work anyway, but I tap into this sort of energy, and I get into a coffee shop, and I'm kind of like creating again or writing, and that was a bit tough to kind of find that. And look, today now we're recording from my home studio / office, which is amazing. Up until then, we were sort of in a flat and on top of each other and all this stuff. So it's just been a bit of a journey, and I'm learning to appreciate, the way that I described it to someone recently. I used to go to London and sort of miss it and like really loved it and be a bit nostalgic about it. A bit like when you have an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend or an ex-partner, where you sort of reminisce about the good times and you sort of forget about all the bad times. And then eventually I went to visit. It must have been about maybe 6 months ago or something like that, maybe a bit longer. I went to London and I was like, I'm happy to just visit. I wouldn't want to live here again.
Yeah.
And like I moved on. I'd moved on from the ex, and that felt pretty good. I think ultimately, and also look, when we're in incredible nature. Like if we're in an area of France that has lots of rocks, of bouldering. People who come and boulder. This is the mecca of Europe. Bouldering.
Is it Font?
Yeah. It's Fontainebleau. Yeah. So it's like everyone. And you've got INSEAD, where I've been lucky enough to be brought in by a friend, and I sort of do guest lecturing there at the business school. So I'm kind of plugged into that. And then, we go for walks every weekend, and we live literally, the forest is just across the road. So you can't really beat that in a way, and the slow lifestyle, it's actually quite nice for the kids as well.
Yeah.
And we go to each other's houses and stuff. So it's just a different lifestyle.
It is. I mean, like I say, I echo that, but I haven't gone, across the channel to do the similar kind of thing. But again, I go to London once a month, and I love that day there. But I'm also happy, or day and night there. But I'm also very happy to like escape. And the main thing I miss is that I love going to a lot of cinema stuff, and there's often like Q&As with like directors, for example. They happen last minute, and they only ever happen in London. And there's no way I'm getting on a train last minute to do that. But when I do go to London, 48 hours is like super packed, catch a load of people.
Yeah.
Like I say, get that flywheel of energy, and then it sends me back to Manchester to get that, like, be back a bit more with, you know, just the vibe and the family a bit more. And I appreciate that, certainly. So quick whistle stop. With that podcast, you had unconventionalists, which you. So I'll start again. So quick whistle stop. When we met at General Assembly, your podcast was Unconventionalists, and you were mainly known prior to that for being one of the key people in the Movember movement. Can you give like a short, like, brief description to people listening about that, who are, just as an intro to that, and then we'll move into a bit more about what you're doing now, because I think that's a really important scene setting.
Yeah. So I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. The short version is that I, at one point, did a video CV back in 2011. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that it doesn't sound that pioneering today, but back then it just wasn't being done. No one had really done it. I think one video CV came out while I was making mine. And I decided to do this video CV as a way of trying standing out, right? Like I'm dyslexic, and I now know I've been, formally diagnosed with ADHD, but I'm just sort of more of a creative, bouncing off the wall kind of person. And so a conventional paper CV just wasn't going to do it for me. And I wanted to get into the creative ad agency space. Right. And a friend of mine who worked there at an agency called Anomaly. And I thought they were a pretty cool agency. They had an interesting business model where they often took stake in the companies that they would do campaigns for. And I thought that was really cool. And he said, look, my boss gets inundated by emails and messages. Like, if you want him to get back to you, you're going to have to grab his attention. And I remember that planted the seed of, what can I do? And I thought, I'm just going to do a video CV. I'm just going to bring my CV to life. And so I did this video CV with the help of my childhood friend, Miki Mayu, who's like an award-winning documentary maker. Who's got an amazing documentary out that's doing a lot of the festivals called, in French, it's called Chasing Ghosts. And it's about his son who has autism. And it's about, it's an incredible documentary. It really is. It's quite moving. And so he filmed and edited my video CV. And then my best friend, Dennis Durochel, did a website. And it's still, I think, live to this day, called adreamjobwouldbenice.com. And so that went then viral. Like, I didn't know anything about virality, I guess, back then. I didn't even know YouTube. I just uploaded the video on YouTube, hoping that it could send it to a couple of potential recruiters. And suddenly it kind of had a bit of a buzz on Twitter. For those who are young and cool, call it X, formerly known as Twitter. And, people were people messaging Oprah, Tony Robbins, like Dana White. It was just...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it got a bit... They weren't messaging me. People were messaging them, tagging me, saying, like, have you seen this guy? You should, yeah. And then I forgot how, but I think I sent my video CV to Adam Garoni, who back then was the co-founder and CEO of Movember. He's no longer the CEO, but back then he was. And I think I said something like, from one Mo bro to another, it was an honor to raise some money. Here's my video CV. And he looked at it and he was sort of like, where are you based? And I'm like, I'm based in France. At the time, I did a very small stint back in France. I said, but I could be based in London, said for the right reasons, kind of wink, wink. And he's like, look, there's a couple of openings happening in Europe. Get in touch with the team. You never know. And long story short, I didn't even know that Movember was a thing, like an actual foundation. I thought it was like, if you said to me that Halloween is basically a foundation for like kids with diabetes, and so we dress up and eat candy, and like, really, that's a foundation? It was the same thing. Like, Movember was just this thing that happened, and we just grew mustaches. Turns out it's this, like, the world leading men's health charity, right? They've raised to date $1.3 billion for men's health. It's insane, in 20 years or so. And so, long story short, I get an interview, I get the job on the spot, and I'm tasked with launching the foundation across France, Switzerland, and help it grow in Belgium and Spain. And I did that for 4 years. It was like an incredible adventure, just generally like some of the best years of my life. It's like dog years, where back then, when it was like a startup mentality, we used to do so much and everything and anything, and like, anyways, it was pretty amazing. My team and I raised 2.8 million euros for men's health. We got 110,000 people to take part. And this is, think about it, this is micro donations, this is grassroots donations, this isn't sort of huge, big checks. So it was a lot of work. And what I realized then was that all I had was a backpack, a questionable mustache, and a story. That's it. Like, I had Movember's story, like how it started, but I also had my story, sort of why I was really engaged with the cause, because I went through a bit of a situational sort of depression in 2009. I was really low, and I discovered Movember in 2010, I think it was. And it was like these guys sort of growing a mustache, having fun, doing good, take care of your mates, talk about your health. And it was done in a way that really spoke to me. And so I really appreciated it. And so I was very dedicated to raising money for the cause. And in 2012, when I launched Movember France in Paris in September, I'm at this bar. I'm in this bar and I'm doing the presentation, like, hey, this is the foundation and here's what our goals or visions and what I hope we can achieve in France and why you should care, basically. And at the end, during the Q&A, one of the journalists for like a leading media in France asks me in front of everyone, like, oh, cool, but like, what made you want to join Movember? Like, why did you, quit what sounds like a reasonable job for this? And I remember very specifically at that moment that I had like this decision. It was one of these weird cross moments we have, I guess, in our lives, where on one side I could have just gone like, hey, it's a great foundation, it's a great cause, and I could just double down on like the foundation itself. Or I could actually be honest and say, the story where how I had a really tough time, how I struggled, and how it helped me find a voice and blah, blah, blah. But I was terrified of that. Because while I was going through this situational depression and I was struggling to get out of bed in the morning, I didn't want to go out. I'm a pretty social extrovert person.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to hang around with people. I'd go to bed really late, got up really late. And my mum walks into my room one day and I say to her, I think I might be depressed. And she's like, without skipping a beat, just goes like, don't tell anybody.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, what? And I'm like, don't tell anybody. I'm like, don't even Dennis. Dennis is my best friend who I told you about, who helped me with the website. I'm like, why not? She's like, because no one will ever give you a job. Now, I want to say this. She said this because she was really caring. She didn't know better. We've had loads of conversations. I talked about it in my book, Glow in the Dark, about this thing. But so I had this in my mind going like, you can't talk about your struggles in a professional setting. Otherwise, you'll come across as undesirable, unlovable, or unprofessional, or fill in the blank. So I'm in front of this journalist and I decided effectively to share the story. And I was really scared. I felt my heart race and I was like, this is very unprofessional. This career suicide, this whole launch is going to be a disaster. No one's going to do Movember. And instead of, disconnection, what I got was connection. This guy at the end came up to me called Matt and he said, thank you for sharing your story, because I never really heard another guy talk about their struggle openly like that. And I went also through something like that and I'm going to take part and I'll get my friends to take part. And that was like the aha moment. The aha moment was we all have a story worth sharing and most of us are terrified of sharing it. And we have this sort of irony around, if I share my story, then I need to make it all about me and become the center of attention, when it's not. It's actually about the people you're trying to serve. And that's where the Storycast was born. And I then sort of went off and helped companies and leaders and founders tell their stories in a more compelling and effective way.
I'm sure you've read, so I don't want to ram it down your throat, Sapiens.
I haven't. I haven't actually.
Okay.
I've got it. I've got it. Sorry for the creaky sound of my chair. I've got it somewhere.
Oh, it's there. It's behind your Funko Pop doll.
Yes. Yeah.
So Sapiens. That was the first place I had that understood the concept of why the story is important, and that it's almost embedded into our evolution. In that you tell a story like, yeah, Jeff just fell down that well.
Don't go down the well.
Yeah, there's a well over there. And that tells everyone like what they need to know. But if you just say there's guys, don't go over there. There might be something you might fall into. That's it's telling the same kind of situation, but the actual the emotiveness piece part of it is really important. And that's that kind of storytelling thing is something I'm really trying to get the grips with, and I'm kind of fumbling through a bit on LinkedIn and trying to. Hello, and that's something I'm trying to fumble through a bit with what I share on social and on websites. Is like telling the story. It's like why should people listen to me? So people like yourself, there's Jeremy Connell Waits, who talks about telling stories a lot, and so I'm really kind of hooked in as like, okay, how do I tease these things out? So I love that. That's a preemptive aha moment. If you want to, when I ask you the 3 questions at the end, short, let's feel free to dig into that a bit more. But I remember. There's a TV show I watched, and there's telling the real story of a zoo, and the zookeeper was saying about how these chimpanzees in the enclosure were really, really smart and really intelligent, because at one point they put up electric fencing around the compound to keep them a bit more fenced in, but also let people see them a bit more clearly. And it tells a story about one of the chimpanzees getting zapped by the fence. But since then, no one else in the troop got near that fence. And I was like, holy shit! And that was after reading the Sapiens book, and that was me thinking this is like at such a base level that it is in the DNA of so many animals and so many species around the world, and certainly in humans, that I need to kind of understand it a bit more. So
Look, I can break down storytelling in like one sentence. I think
Sure.
most people overcomplicate it. People make a lot of money from complicating it, but effectively a story is about a character who wants something and needs to overcome an obstacle to get it. I mean, that is the basics premise of a story, and you need two elements in a story. You need an intention and you need an obstacle. Every story is built around that. So it's kind of like when I go into companies, right? We want to have an aligned and engaged team, but we don't. And so the final piece is an outcome, right? So it's intention, obstacle, outcome. And an outcome can be a happy ending, it can be a sad ending, it can be a lesson learned. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Like I literally went to my daughter's teacher, who was my teacher when I was a kid, asked me to come in and talk about being an author during World Book Week a couple of weeks ago. And I've actually got it here. I'll show you. So I did these cards for people who are listening to this, and if you can see it, I did these cardboard cards. Yeah. And to sort of teach them like the basics of storytelling as a really simplified version, and the kids get it instantly. Yeah. Like they can write stories, they can explain stuff, and I think it's also, there's lots of different stories, right? You can break down, but the example you gave about the monkeys is an interesting one. It's like, do you know how they used to train? Well, some places still do it, but how they used to train elephants to sort of stay within reason of a circus? Like how they would actually make them obey. Yeah, I don't know. When they're sort of baby elephants, they'd put a chain to their feet, and so they got used to this idea that they can't run away. But by the time they remove the chain, the story is so anchored within their brain that they don't even think that they can run away with, because the chains in their mind is still there. And I think that's just a powerful reminder that, some of the stories that will shape our life are the stories we tell ourselves, about what we can or cannot do. And I just love, I'm not like, for example, Jeremy, right? He's a master, like Jedi at story structure, right? Like decomposing stories and stuff. What I focus more on is like the human element of storytelling. So it's sort of like, how do you get people to pay attention to what you have to say, share, or sell? Yeah. That's what I geek out about. It's kind of like, so I just came back from Nike, for example, where they asked me to come over and deliver a leadership session and part of their program for a lot of their impact leaders who work in a lot of these amazing non-for-profits and charities around the world, helping girls to get more into sports and kids and kids who, who've lost a leg or both legs, and it was really to help them, like, how do you tell your story in such a way that the world pays attention? And that I love the element of the human side of like, how do we tap into the humanness, I guess, and really get people to pay attention and care. And it's like, it's trial and error, but I'm grateful I get to do this work because it's pretty wild.
Well, it's not even human. It's like, I discuss it's like animal-based instinct.
Yeah. Primal. Yeah.
Primal. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for.
And that, by the way, and not to go on a tangent, but I think, a lot of people are talking about adolescence, right? At the moment, it's kind of the zeitgeist conversation for the last few weeks. And
the TV show Adolescence.
The TV show. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, on Netflix. And what was interesting is when I was watching it, and this happens, by the way, I've got a confession to make. I don't think I talk about this openly, but when I go and see a play, or when I go and see a speaker, or when I go and see a show, I spend most of my time looking at people. I don't spend a lot of time looking at the person on stage. I'm fascinated by sort of how people respond or what gets people to pay attention, right? And when I was watching Adolescence, I was looking at it from a technical aspect, how they created this sort of tension, and I thought it was a masterpiece. It was a masterpiece of storytelling. I think they're also the interesting piece of it that they did is that they didn't take a typical approach to storytelling, in the sense that they didn't necessarily have a moral, they didn't necessarily have a preaching sort of message, and they also flipped. For example, I don't want to give away too much for people listening, so spoiler alert: if you haven't seen it, you might want to fast forward the next 30 seconds. But what I'll say is the fourth episode is really based on the family of the perpetrator, right? And usually we often focus on the family of the victims, rightfully so, right? But we very rarely see the impact of what happens on the family. And I thought that was a very interesting switch. Again, we talk about storytelling. The point for me of the show, and we could all argue about this, was that it could happen to anyone. It can happen to you. And it's not about the parents' fault. It's not about, it's just a sort of a societal approach on how do we get here. And that is through a story. I mean, I haven't seen a Netflix show, I think, correct me because you're the expert, but I don't think I've seen a Netflix show that has translated into so many conversations, even in Parliament.
Well, right? it's crazy how, I mean, these guys, for me, like Stephen Graham, I've loved him since watching him in Snatch.
Yeah,
it's just like
right.
it's just a little bird of Scouser to me.
Is that a gun, Tommy?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the Germans. Protection.
So for me, it's just this like wily Scouser guy, and it's co-created something that's like, I'm hearing it on podcasts in the States.
Yeah,
and they're like having whole like episodes about it, saying, "Guys, we need to talk about this show that's come from the UK."
Yeah,
and I'm like, wow. I mean, they've got in the States, they've got other problems, but also they've got the same problem. And I'm hearing it across other different countries, and it's Netflix's biggest show for ages because of the story it's bringing, and governments are talking about and schools are talking about making sure that the kids watch it in school to understand what's going in there. When you said technical, my mind went to initially how the one-shot nature of it has fucked people in, but also I think the technical part of it is also, as you said, is like it's the way it's focusing on the family and the whole construction of the story, the technical construction of the story as well, kind of combines together.
The arc, the arc of the story, and also, you know, you've got. I mean, I've been involved in a very small TV or stuff like production, right? And I've been around people who make films or documentaries. I just remember the first episode. I kept on saying to my partner, I was just like, "Do you realize this is like one shot? It's still." And she was like, "No, I'm sure they must cut." I'm like, this is one shot. Like this whole thing is one shot, and like it's like a choreography. And people are like, yeah, it's like a play. It is and it isn't, right? Like you've got the stakes of being a player where you need to know your lines, you need to know your cues, you need to step on stage, but it's a completely controlled environment. You've got one stage, you've got people coming out, maybe a few props changing. The way when I talk about the technical prowess, like for me, I actually look. You might argue with me here, Kobi, but I compared it to Free Solo. You know, the award-winning documentary.
Loved it.
Yeah. The human feat that he did, right, on, is it El Capitan? I forgot. Yeah, that's it. El Cap, that's it. Like the human feat that it took for him to like scale this mountain, right, with no safety nets, reminded me of the show. Like the way that every single person must be on point. And I think one thing I haven't heard talk about enough is that the acting, right, is phenomenal. And one of the reasons that I've come to understand as to why this acting was phenomenal, beyond the actors themselves or actresses, you know, beyond the actual talent, is the stake, the common stake that they had, that we are doing something special, we're doing something that's never really been done, and the pressure that everybody has to step up to their A game. Because I was thinking, right, you know this, that they were shooting twice a day, right, for 7 days each episode. They only had 14 takes. That was it. And the first episode, they got it on second take, and then episode 2, 3, 4 was on the last take, the 14th take. Yeah. So can you imagine? You're minute 38, right? And you mess up the line, and you go, "Oh, dude!" Like, and you sort of, you know, you go back, and it's just. So I get the topic, like the importance of the topic, and you know, and you can debate. People have also had a lot of issues with it. I just think from a story arc, structure, telling, was just a masterpiece. Yeah, it was just like
it is all those different components together, and that's what. So if the story stood by itself across those four, I guess those 4 episodes, but told in a more traditional way, jump cut, smash cut into people's faces and things like that. Yeah, be like, okay, this is an interesting story. Definitely, we should take this away and learn more from it. But the way it pulls you into the story and doesn't let you go. Yeah, that's the piece with the technical piece. And I speak to a lot of cineasts and cine literate friends who, you know, for the moment it starts, it's like this, you can just sense that this is one big take. And it's interesting, people who realise that from a cinephile point of view and appreciate the technical aspects of it, versus people who don't necessarily realise that, but are sucked in because they don't realise what's going on in their whole kind of fibre of being. Like, why is this? Why
is this so tense? Why is this like? Because there's no relief. And actually, film buffs such as yourself and people listening might know this film. Have you seen the film Irreversible by Gaspar Noé? Yeah. Super hardcore film, right? We're not going to talk about the content itself. But the reason I'm mentioning this is that there is a very shocking, violent, traumatic scene. And the reason why I think that scene is so brutal is because for 14 minutes, it doesn't move. Yeah. The camera stays, and you see the camera's locked. And again, they did that scene. I was listening about, like, years back when that came out, I was listening about how they did it. he was a professional boxer, the guy who, or an amateur boxer, but he was a boxer, the guy. So he knew how to control his punches within an inch of his target, basically. And I think they scheduled to film that again twice a day, and I think they had a couple of days to do it. And they wanted the viewer to feel so much discomfort because you can't escape. And I don't know if you remember, there's a character that walks at the back,
100%.
and then leaves, leaves. Yeah, but you can't as a viewer. And I think it's like that in adolescence. You're gripped, even the third episode between the debate with the psychiatrist, and you can't go anywhere. And I could geek about it for a while, but I think it's. I hope they win a bunch of awards. Basically, I hope they get a bunch of recognition because it's phenomenal.
I mean, it ties in exactly to what you do at Storycast. So, I mean, tell us about Storycast. So,
Storycast is a sort of impact storytelling agency that I started to help brands, so things like Microsoft and Nike and Premier League and those sort of big companies, to help sort of tell their story in a more human way. But really it's about getting the people to feel more part of an exciting mission. So the third book I'm actually writing at the moment is sort of every employee, every person, every leader wants to be part of an exciting story. And when people don't feel part of an exciting or compelling story, they feel disengaged, they feel sort of checked out a little bit. And so I try to do that. And the other part of the work that I do is to sort of humanize leadership. And what I mean by that is I'll often be in situations where there are companies that are growing, they've got, AI powered sort of data driven software, whatever it is, but they're finding that their teams aren't collaborating as well as they used to, or they feel like the culture's changed, they feel that their leaders are struggling to sort of engage their teams and employees. And so I go in and I talk about the content for my book, Glow in the Dark, which is this idea that, we all have a personal story worth sharing, and actually by sharing parts of ourselves in a more human way, we come across as a more compelling, more influential and more impactful leader. So
you said there, just laid it in, your third book you're writing.
Yeah.
So tell us about your first book. And I remember you talking about like mistakes you made with your first book in terms of more about like release and thinking that and then almost over-egged it with a second book. Is like Amazon were like, no, this is far too popular, this is some bots happening. So tell us briefly about those. What are you gonna, how are you going to rectify for the third book?
So the first book I wrote is called It's Not You, It's Me, I'm Holding It. It was a small book. I'll be perfectly honest. It was a complete ego-driven book in the sense of, like, I heard that this is 2013 when I wrote it, I think. Yes. And I'd heard, like, if you want to build a coaching business, because at the time I used to work at Movember, but I would moonlight as a coach. So I'd get up at 5 or 6 a.m. to coach people in Vietnam, and I'd go to bed at 11 o'clock coaching people in LA. Oh. And on top of this full-time job at Movember, right? And so I wanted to try and build a coaching business because I really loved the idea of creating space for people to sort of reach their full potential and get over their saboteurs and limiting beliefs, that kind of stuff. And so I wrote that book, and it was self-published. I wrote it, found my own editor, found my own book cover designer, the whole project was very intense. And look, I talk about this because I just want it to be known for other people going through this process. By the time the book was published, I just wasn't really proud of the content. I felt like I had spoken about parts of my story, but not all of it. Like I'd left out a lot of the real difficult parts, if I think. And then, you talked about my podcast, The Unconventionalist, that I launched in 2015. The genesis of that in a nutshell was I got nominated for being one of the 50 most inspiring people of London by an initiative of the City of London, like the Mayor of London, with Inspired 50. And I was just like, this is a mistake. I legit, when I got the email, I was like, no, you got the wrong guy. And I actually said to the audience, like, no, I think you got the wrong guy. Like, no. And I was like, but why? Like, I just didn't understand. So I remember going to this event, and I asked my friends and clients to come with me, because I thought if I arrive with like a gang, a squad, they're not going to kick me out because it'll be too awkward.
Wow.
And so I walked in there just thinking, and I was seeing all these other people on the list. These people have done incredible things. And I was just thinking, what am I doing here? And I started talking to the other nominees. What do you call them? I don't know what you call them. People who are listed. Anyway.
Oh, the people in the cohort.
Yeah, right. So like the people who did 50 most inspiring that year of London, and I'm speaking to them, and every one of them, except maybe for a couple, but most of them were just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And I was like, that's insane. That's nuts. Like, I know why I'm not here, but like, why are you saying that? And through those conversations, I realized, we all navigate self-doubt. We all have moments of just feeling like we're inadequate or imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it. And I remember sending an email to the whole cohort going, hey, on the back of the conversations last night, I'd love to launch a podcast because I think a lot of these conversations need to be heard. You know, I was coaching people who were telling me that they wanted to achieve this thing. And I would speak to the people who had achieved this thing and who were telling me how much they were struggling. And I thought, why are we only showing this part of success, right? Air quote. And I think back then, a lot of the podcasts were mostly North American, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
A lot of the interview style podcasts were North American. And I felt like I wanted to have a more real conversation. And so I say this jokingly, but the Unconventionalist podcast started off as what the Diary of a CEO became. So I used to interview people about their stories and they used to cry. I just didn't have the vision, the drive, the commitment, the resources, the whatever you want to call it, that Steven's managed to do and exceptionally well. But that was it. That was really what I did. I used to interview people about their stories. And through that process, I started picking up on this other sort of phenomenon, which is I would interview these people about their stories and I was inspired, I was moved. And I would say at the end, like, have you ever shared the story before? And a lot of them would say no. And I'd be like, but why? You know, and it was crazy to me because I was getting messages, DMs or emails from listeners going, I just heard the story of X. It really inspired me to do Y. Or I've heard the story of X and I've bought their book or I've joined their waiting list for their software, whatever it was. So I had a front row seat of what happens, the correlation between people who opened up about their struggles in a way that served others and how people connected with it and wanted to buy from them or join them or work for them. And I kept on going like, why are people not doing this more? It's a bit, I don't know how to explain it. It's like a scientist, right? Like if you come across this new finding and you go like, why are not more people doing it? So I started asking all the guests, like, why are you not sharing your story? And then I identified there were 9 story blockers that got in the way.
Okay.
Right. From, I don't think I have a relevant story to, I don't know how to tell my story in a way that feels safe. I don't want to upset people with that part of my story. Like all these sort of blockers, right?
Is one of them, I don't want it to be all about me.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to come across as self-centered.
Yeah.
I don't want to come across as I'm using my story.
Yeah.
Right. So all of these, like 9 story blockers, there's more, but I basically blocked them into these nine story blockers. And I started toying with the idea of like, how can I get this message out to more people? Because I really, really believed in it. And, my Movember story where I didn't want to share my story. And then when I shared my story, everything clicked and connected. And so did my TEDx talk. It got 1.3 million views because I think I was just very honest about some of the stuff. And
that was about being the kind of
purpose. That was like
influencer, like on the outside, being an influencer, entrepreneur, and people said you must have the best life. I really love the way you started that by taking a selfie of yourself.
Yes,
that's one for the gram, and then went into the story about like that. Yeah, it's one for the gram, but also it's not really.
Yeah, and that I've got to give credit to Amrish Shah, a friend of mine, who, when I was practicing my TEDx talk, I practiced it with him I remember we were in Hampstead, like the Hampstead Park or Forest, I forgot what it's called now.
Hampstead Heath.
Hampstead Heath, thank you, man. That's C40s brain, just like butter. And I remember just practicing it with him, and he stopped me and he was like, "Can I be honest?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "That is boring. This is not you." Like, because he'd seen me at uni, and I used to be in plays at uni, and I was often like the sort of the city sort of funny role a little bit. And he's like, "You've got way more in you that you're not showing, and you need to just really exaggerate this whole entrepreneur / influencer / founder." And so I'd practiced a few times that intro. That if you're listening to this or watching this and you go and see my TEDx talk, you've got to keep in mind that when I did that intro that I did in front of people, it bombed. Not like some people just wouldn't laugh or it was just weird. And so I remember Julie, my partner, she was in the room pregnant with my daughter, our first, and she said to me, when you got on stage, I was holding my breath. When you said those first few lines and people laughed, and I relaxed, and then you're going to be all right. And so, I go on stage and I make a parody, basically, because when I talk about stories need to have a hook. So that was my hook. It was kind of a bit of a parody of like this persona. And then I switch into, actually, this is what it's like sometimes. Like I tell my friends I'm crushing it and I'm too busy, but actually it's because I don't know how I'm going to make, my mortgage this month, or I feel like, anyway, So yeah, and all that, so all the stuff that has story, and I end up getting a literary agent that believes in the project, shop around the book. We get a couple of offers. I'm not going to lie, most of them were like, no, you don't have a big enough platform, you don't have a big enough name, you don't have enough followers. But got quite lucky, and a couple of publishers sort of put their name in the hat. I think I had 3 offers in the end, and then I went with a publisher who I felt really got the project. And the small story is that originally the title was From Imposter to Impact. And the book was about imposter syndrome for entrepreneurs. It was very much like how to overcome imposter syndrome for entrepreneurs. And I started writing it, and eventually I was like, this isn't the book. I didn't feel like I had the legitimacy to write that book. I didn't want to be known as the imposter syndrome guy. What I was really excited about was the story. And so I repitched it to the publisher, knowingly that they might pull the contract out and I have to refund them the first advance settlement. But they were very brave and trusting me, and they're like, yeah, okay. And so I went to work and wrote the book, and then, Glow in the Dark sort of was born, and with the metaphor of this idea that when you share your story, you become a beacon of hope for people who feel, hopeless, or that you can stand out in a sea of noise in a way that is of service, not in a way that is self-centered. And I did a campaign to try and launch it, and what the story you were sort of referring to with Amazon, which is, so you're gonna enjoy this, because I know you used to be, I don't know if you still are, but used to be like in productivity hack and growth marketing, all that kind of stuff. So I'd found out that the way that Amazon calculates its best-selling list is in brackets of 4 hours or something like that. So they sort of calculate within, I think it's every 4 hours, they sort of recount the number of sales that you have, okay? And so the launch day was, I want to say 3rd of December, 2022. I could be wrong. I need to go back, but it's about that. And so I said to my friends, to my email list, to my clients, to everyone, was like, look, if you want to support, if you want to buy the book, please buy it in the lead up, because the way that bestsellers lists on Sunday Telegraph are done are like they count from Thursday to Saturday, and every pre-sale that you made. And so I was like, just buy my book. And on the release day, if you could just get a book between it's going to open up at 8 a.m. and anytime between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m, if you could please just get a book, that'd be brilliant, because I think that's going to give us a chance. Yeah, because you can manipulate the bestsellers list if you lower your price and increase demand. But I was with a traditional publisher, so you can't do that. And it wasn't like some sort of, and you also can't go for like some weird niche, like left-handed, I don't know, knitting grannies, from Yorkshire, whatever. I was in entrepreneurship and business and self-development or whatever. So I had very big categories. So I was like, look, let's go for it. Let's give it a go. We start off, my publisher calls me, he's like, we're looking really strong. Sales numbers are coming in. I think there's a very high chance we hit number one Amazon. And I was like, brilliant. Because there's no way I was going to do Sunday Times list. I knew that. And people start saying, yeah, well done. And then and I remember at one point I get a message from someone, and she says, hey, I can't seem to put the book in my basket. I can't order it. Is everything okay? I'm like, oh, maybe it's sold out, and that's a good thing, because if it sells out, you can still order it, right? You can still pre-order. But so I go on Amazon, and you can't. There's no basket. There's nothing, and I panic, because this is maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:15. I forgot what it was, and I start panicking. Long story short, what happened was that there were so many orders in that window that Amazon thought it was like Russian bots that was trying to crash the website, and so Amazon locked my page.
That's just so dark, isn't it?
It is so dark. And so we came in the top 5. We made it, even that short amount of time, we made it I think a couple of categories, but in the top 5. I never made it to number 1 Amazon. And I was really, really upset. I'm not going to lie. I was very upset, very frustrated. And I had my book launch that evening, and I had to switch. I remember just going okay, doesn't matter. It happened. It happens. The book is out there. The message is going to be spread, and that's what matters. And I had one of the most phenomenal nights of my life. That book launch was some of my favorite people there. So much love. We had a great time. I had, friends like Dr. Rupi Ojla came from the Doctor's Kitchen, came out and spoke, and Guillaume Power from TLC, and Vanessa Bello, and Donna O'Toole. And it was just it was a very emotional night.
Awesome.
That was book number 2.
Well, this is called Aha Moments Podcast. We're going to get to the 3 questions shortly. Sorry, I can't remember what I was going to ask you.
40s! I tell you, I don't know if you're in your 40s, Kobi.
That's what happens,
But I'm telling you, it's like my brain is just going to absolute shit.
Well, let's go to the Aha Moments questions.
Yeah.
So this is the Aha Moments Podcast. So for people listening for the first time, I'm going to ask Mark 3 questions related to Aha Moments. So the first one is, can you think of, and you may have talked about it already, Aha moment you found for a client or customer in service or product or company you work for, then how did you get to or shepherd them to that point as soon as you worked out what it was to get them there, make sure that they had their aha moment within your services?
So I don't know why this example comes up, I'll be honest, but I'll just go with it. So a client reached out to me who wanted to become better at connecting with their audience when they spoke on stages or ran sessions or, being with teams, etc. And so back then I used to do sort of a boot camp, like an accelerated boot camp, where I'd spend a day with leaders and I would just go through their story, unpack their story, interview them a bit like this, and then sort of map out some of the key moments and help them see how the dots connected and how they could have a more powerful connection with their audience that would get them to sort of get people to pay attention, basically. And I remember, he was sort of going through his life achievements, and it's someone who has excelled pretty much at anything he's done, right? So when he was a young boy, he was in the choir, and that choir got like a platinum gold disc, that they sold. And then he was competing for Team GB under 21.
Oh, wow.
At the Olympics. And then he went into the army and sort of went up the ranks and, got, honors and saved some of his fellow countrymen and women. And so he was a bit like the superhero, right? Like he sort of, there was just something that I was just like, there's something there. And I remember just going, just tell me about your childhood real quick. Like, tell me about what it was like growing up and stuff. And eventually he tells me that when he was younger, he had a father who had problems with substance abuse. Mm-hmm. And I believe it was drinking, but I could be wrong. And that he would sometimes lay his hands on his mum. And so he often put himself in between his dad's fists and his mum's body and sister. And I just remember, like even now, still telling you this, and this is a long time ago, mm-hmm. things just got quiet. And that was the aha moment. The aha moment was like, so this is why you are so committed to defending others and protecting others and creating places where people feel more seen and collaborative and all this kind of stuff. And I said to him, I was like, have you ever told that story? He was like, no, and I won't. And I was like, okay, but just so you know, that is your origin story. That is like the genesis of you, of who you are. But I also know, because my partner is way more into therapy and psychotherapy, and she's done training in child therapy and that kind of stuff. And there's a thing about respect the boundaries. Yeah. And it's not ready till it's ready. And so I said, cool. Now you know, we found it. You can do what you want with it. Yeah. You don't have to share it, but now you know it. It's there.
It's fully baked.
A year later, he sends me a podcast, and he goes, "It took me a little while, but I got there, and let's see what happens." And that podcast went on. That particular podcast show, not only to say the episode, but he did put it as part of his nomination, won one of the British Podcast Awards.
Oh, amazing!
And I've seen him since just say his in a sentence, but not going into like specific details. But he says in a sentence his backstory when he introduces himself, and it gives this credibility and this authenticity and this connection. And yeah, so that was the aha moment, which is linked to sort of your story doesn't need, like when you talk, it doesn't have to be all about your story. Your story is just a bridge to the root, to the reason why you do what you do.
So I think what I love about these, first of all, I love the way you said origin story, because my mind went straight to superhero-dom.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be Bruce Wayne's, experiencing your parents in the alleyway after the theatre show to become Batman.
Yeah.
There are key things that happen in your life that influence the way you are, and if you can unpack and understand them a bit, then that can unlock a lot of what's going on inside you, and that could be your driving force going forward if you can and harness that. And
it doesn't like one of the story blockers, right, that we talked about is I don't have a story worth sharing. Like I don't have a Hollywood background, I didn't have any trauma, didn't have any problem, and it's not about that. First of all, it's not about that. I mean, Gabor Mate said this great thing. He says, it's not about what happened to you, it's about what happened inside of you as a result of what happened. That counts, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the reason why I'm saying this is that I remember doing a session with this creative group, and I was kind of like demoing and unpacking this person's story. And I said to them, like, tell me about the first time, you came across, the idea that you love creativity. This is someone that used to do websites and brand design for people. Mm-hmm. And they had an agency that did creative design and graphic design, that kind of stuff. But long story short, his dad was a photographer. When he was younger, his dad took him to the studio, and he remembers walking around seeing all these creatives and artists. And this person had a MacBook, or whatever they call, like, those old school computers, when they were like that big unit with like a mouse or something.
Yeah.
What they're called now.
Is it the blue with the power? It was an iMac.
Yeah.
It was an iMac.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. iMac. That's it. So he sees an iMac, and he was mesmerized. And so I'm like, tell me more. Like, what's going on? Like, he's like, and I just remember seeing this mouse, right? This little mouse, and he's like, what is that? And the person was like, oh, that's a mouse. It's like, what does it do? It's like, well, you move it around, and he was just completely like blown away that this beautiful thing could do all these things. And so I said to him, I was like, well, isn't that funny? He's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, isn't that funny that what you do is sort of the same? And he's like, I don't get it. He's like, well, you want people to create websites or brand identities that make people feel the same way that you felt the first time you saw that mouse.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh my God, that's exactly it. Right? And so that's not a story about a trauma. That's not a story about like, but it's sometimes we are so close to our stories, which is called proximity bias, that we fail to see the value that we have. And so that's why I believe unpacking your story is like a really cool exercise.
Well, this is analogous, perhaps is personal sometimes, but one thing I try to do, and I'm seeing a lot of people when they're sharing online, to share everything. Like Chris Do, for example, talks about the future. He talks about share everything you know. If people want to buy from you, if they want to work from you, they'll buy into you because they know that you're the expert. They know that they see it in you. If you're withholding, people can tell that, and people are going to buy from you. Going to buy from you. People aren't going to buy from you. Aren't going to buy from you. And there's plenty of times where I've seen a tutorial to do something on Photoshop and going, great, thank you very much. I know how to do it now. I'm going to do that myself. But then there's been like tutorials for something else. I'm like, dude, can you just do it for me?
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic example that, give the information for free, charge for implementation.
Yeah.
And
I feel like that, what you're saying there is almost like that. The origin story is like the next level. It's like, give the why there, isn't it? It's not the how. The how is...
I mean, you could literally read my book, Glow in the Dark, right? And I've put every exercise that I do with clients, that I do I put it in here. So some people have actually gone through it and completely taught themselves to go through it. And I get messages still to this day. It's like amazing. I even get messages from leaders and companies who use it with their teams and offsites and that kind of stuff. And that's brilliant, right? And then there are people who just reach out and say, hey, can you help me just do this? Basically, I just feel like I need some guidance. And so, share for free and charge for implementation.
The second aha moment question is, think of an aha moment in a product or service that you love, and what was it? What sucked you in? I often give the example of the first time someone told me about Uber, and I was like, shut up, take all my money.
Like that. Well, yeah. Okay. So, I don't know why this comes up. I feel like an absolute idiot, Kobi, because I could have created Uber before Uber started, and I'll tell you why. I lived in Kazakhstan once upon a time.
Oh, wow.
In
Ulaanbaatar?
No, in Almaty and Astana. And there were taxis, but no one really used taxis. The way it worked is that you'd go on the street, you put your hand out, and any car was a potential taxi.
Right.
And so they would stop, and you'd say, I'm going to King's Road, number 237, whatever. And they would say, £2, or £2.50, and be like, yeah, or no, or whatever, right? So every car was a potential driver. And I remember in LA, the first time I went to LA for work, and that there was this thing called Uber. And I remember just ordering this Uber, going into this car, and I started chatting with the person, I forgot they had a day job, but they were doing this on the side. And I just remember going, wait, this is exactly what they did in Kazakhstan. And, this happened over and over again. My friend, Dennis Jewish, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but my best mate, Dennis, he was in China for a while, and he designed, he's a program, he does like coding and designing and AI and that kind of stuff now. But he designed one of the original sort of Deliveroo's, if you want, with this sort of local Chinese entrepreneur who wanted to give people access to local groceries, but who didn't want to go and pick it up. And so they would have these delivery people who'd go. And he did that, but it was like a really small scale. So I guess the aha moment is, it's not about the idea. It's about the vision. It's about like, I'll give you another example, a really silly example. This is years ago, we're going back now. I had this idea that as men, we don't drink enough, we don't hydrate enough. And it's one of the pivotal sort of pillars of health. And so how can we gamify drinking water? And so I had this idea of creating a water bottle with different sort of marks on it. And the more you drink it, like you go on Ryan Gosling, unlock Brad Pitt mode, all this kind of really silly things to drink. And so I did an MVP. I got an old pasta jar and emptied it, and it was like a glass like tomato jar, right?
Yeah.
Emptied it, took off the label, and I took a Sharpie pen and I started putting all these sort of traits, these sort of marks on it. And this was back when I discovered Noah Kagan. Okay, just like pure transparency here. I was doing his 1K a month accelerator that he did, and part of it was like just do an MVP, just validate it, sell it, see if it works. And I recorded a video on Facebook. This is way back when you could record. So I recorded a video on Facebook, and I'm like, hey, so I'm just creating this prototype of like gamification of hydration, to drink your water. What I'll do is and I'll put your name on it, And I'm selling these for like £5 or whatever it was. I forgot what it was, you know. And I was like, you know, PayPal me £5 to this email address if you want it. I think a couple of actually my now partner, who was friends back then, actually was one of the people who must have felt really bad for me and PayPal me £5. And this other guy called Angus Fletcher also did it. So shout out to Angus. But anyway, and everybody laughed. Everybody was like, did you just write on a passenger? Like, what is this? Ha ha ha. About 6 months ago, my sister-in-law sent me a picture of like this huge sort of brand that do that.
Yeah.
And now, like, even now, like, I've got this water, right, which is all about, it reminds me how to drink. And so, again, the aha moment is that it's not about the idea, it's about the vision and implementation.
Last aha moment question is a personal aha moment or life hack that you'd like to share with anyone.
A personal life hack or aha moment. Yeah, I don't know what. Again, I'm just trusting whatever comes up when you say that. It took me, I would say, 3.5 decades, no more, to appreciate the gift of silence and space. Yeah, as someone who's got ADD and dyslexia and all this kind of stuff, I'm often always doing. And I remember 2015, I did this sort of leadership program over 10 months, over different sort of resident programs and stuff. And one of them, without giving too much away, involved being in silence for 24 hours.
Right.
And it was my worst nightmare. That we had to hand in our phones, where there was no technology, no eye contact, and no words for 24 hours. And I remember the anxiety and the panic attack at that idea. And I was like, but I can't, because I need to get my alarm. How am I going to be able to be on time? And I need to text my girlfriend and like my ex at the time. And they're like, you good? You'll be all right. And dude, I remember like within an hour, like I'm not even joking. I've never shared this, but this is true story. Not even within an hour, I want to say half an hour or 40 minutes, whatever it was, I find myself in this room and I break down into tears.
Wow.
And I think I had been so adamant to avoid being with my own feelings and discomforts that I'd spent my entire life running away from them. And so my aha moment, my personal hack, is really the gift of stillness and quiet. So whether that's mindfulness practice, whether that's just sitting, doing nothing, whether that's meditating, whatever it is, I would say that it has, I don't do it, I really don't. But when I do, the huge benefit I see is a buffer. I create this sort of buffer of reactivity between an event and a trigger and a response. And I think the magic lies into that ability to create that buffer. And so yeah, the life hack would be try and have moments of stillness in your day. And I know, you know, you've got a young kid and, you know, it's not easy as young parents with young kids, but yeah, that would be the aha moment.
Dude, that's amazing. Are you happy for people to get in contact with you on LinkedIn and via your website and things like that? So LinkedIn is where I hang out the most. As you know, I go from like posting every day to burning out and then disappearing for a week or a month and then going back. But yeah, I mostly shared. I use LinkedIn as an experiment, as like a diary, kind of what I see, I observe and I share. And yeah, LinkedIn's the best place. And then markleruste.com. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I've followed you down the 100. As we record this, I'm 3 days away, I think, from 100 posts in 100 days.
Woo!
And
get in, Kobi.
It's I need to decompress before I write that post about what's happened in that time. But I do enjoy LinkedIn a lot, and you know, you've been
crushing it, man. You've been you're at 8,000 now. 8,000 followers?
No, 6.5 now. I think.
6.5. Okay, yeah. No, sorry, I'm 8,000. I'm confusing. Yeah. I just got to 8. Yeah, 6.5. I remember. But it's mad. Like you've grown super fast, and I really enjoy your mix of tips, like your carousels, how you mix things up, like humor, and I think anybody who wants to sort of learn more about you should 100% be following you on LinkedIn.
Well, it's all about you. This is me talking to you and taking your time and sharing it with the world. So, Mark, thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's been a pleasure to reconnect, and we've got, I think, there's many things I want to talk about to you about, because again, many parallels. I'm just looking at your background. I know you've curated that in the same way I've kind of looked at mine and created it. And I've got the same. I noticed I've got the same. I think it's the same.
Is it a Polaroid?
It's a Polaroid camera.
Yeah. I got the exact same. Yeah, I got it for my birthday. They gave it to me for my birthday. Yeah, it was really cool for my 40th. There was a couple of Polaroid cameras basically going around and people taking pictures and then filling out a book and stuff. So it was really cool. And also that painting, where is it? There is from Vanessa Bello, my friend, who's an amazing artist and also an amazing facilitator and speaker. It took me a little while to be honest. To kind of, and I haven't finished actually. I still need to finish the top shelf on the left. But no, I love it, man. I created my sort of little den, my creative space, and I feel very grateful to have it.
And this is something that would have been a lot more difficult in London in that.
Impossible. And my flat was the size. Like, I'm not even joking. My flat, I think, was the size of the office. Almost. Yeah.
Cheers, Mark.
Cool, man.
Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Mark, for joining me again. This is probably the longest episode I've recorded about our Moments podcast, and I probably could spend a lot more time talking to you as well. We just need to catch up and go for beers or a cup of tea or something like that. So next time you're in London, next time you're in the UK, then give me a shout. Likewise, if I ever go to France, I'll come and see you. Guys, if you're listening or you're watching, thank you so much for listening and watching. Please do like, subscribe, comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a review if you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts. And please share with your friends, share with one friend, share with one family member, share with one colleague, because that really helps this podcast get out to a further audience and help them. And, help me out, basically. I want you to help me out. Mark's really keen for you guys to get in contact with him. His book, Glow in the Dark, is available now. His first book, I don't know if that's available, but if you go onto Amazon and click on Mark Leruste, then you'll be able to find all his books. But Glow in the Dark, get that right now. His third book's coming out soon.